Thank you so much for having me here today. It is wonderful to be back in Japan. It's one of my favorite places to come. And the first time I came to Japan was in 1995. I was a student at Stanford University, and I was a PhD student there. And I was very interested in studying choice, and studying choice in a way that would be comprehensive, because I didn't want to just study choice from the Western perspective. And so in 1995, I came to Kyoto Daigaku for about 6 months, and I worked with Professor Shinobu Kitayama. And during that time, when I was here in Kyoto in 1995, I can tell you I did some of my first studies on choice right here in Japan. And in fact, some of the questions that I ended up asking and still work on today were influenced from my time here in Japan. So I remember when I first got to Japan, this was in the mid-1990s, the big fight, or shall we say debate, between the United States and Japan back then had to do with how many choices should Japanese people be offered in the marketplace. You know, back then, when you went to a store, grocery store, you know, a 7-Eleven, the number of choices you had were so different from what you had in your typical American store. I remember going to the ice cream parlor, and you know, you could have maybe 6 choices. Often it was more like 3. Or when you went to the grocery store and you wanted to buy toothpaste or potato chips or, you know, any number of things that we were used to having hundreds upon hundreds of choices about, you would have maybe 2, 3, 5. That was about the way choice was. And there was this ongoing debate where the Americans were constantly saying to the Japanese, you need to have more choice, and the Japanese were saying, why? And what was interesting to me was when I was here, there were many times when I would ask Japanese people who would regularly go to Hawaii for their honeymoon or something, and I would ask them, so when you get to Hawaii, you know, aren't you impressed with the grocery stores? Aren't you buying interesting things? And they said, oh yeah, it's very interesting to walk through the grocery store, and then I find my mochi ice cream, and I buy that. I'm like, interesting. In fact, while I was here in Japan, I found there were some students, American students, that had come and were also studying in Kyoto Daigaku. And so I asked them to think about all the choices they made in a typical day as compared to the Japanese students who were studying in Kyoto Daigaku. And I tracked them. And I found that the American students, even though they had the same exact schedule as the Japanese students, the American students reported that they had 4 times more choice, which I thought was rather curious. So, if I were to ask all of you, how many choices do you think you make in a typical week? Can you give me some numbers? And do not feel afraid to call it out. I like interaction. 7,000. Give me some other numbers. 200? Just call out. 10,000. Okay. So you're saying you make a lot of choices. You know, if you think about it, since the 1990s to now, indeed, in Japanese culture, we have a lot of choice, right? That ice cream parlor that used to offer only 6 choices now offers over 100 choices, right? We live in a world today where no matter where you go across the globe, we have more choice. And that's true everywhere. In the 1970s, the average grocery store in the United States had over 9,000 products. But today, the average grocery store in the United States, and I'm talking brick and mortar, has 47,000 products. But Amazon, which is available in about 18 different markets around the globe, offers you an estimated 480 million choices and counting. Walmart offers 75 million or more options. Your local Starbucks boasts that it offers you 117,000 drink combinations. So we're just talking about coffee. And that's only looking at choices that are, the usual choices, like what you read, what you wear, what you eat, what you drink. What about the kinds of choices that were never available to our parents and our grandparents? The kinds of choice domains that nobody had ever previously imagined, like how to find your soulmate. Did you know that in the world today it is estimated that there is about 6,000 different dating apps, 2,600 of which are in the United States and at least 10 of which exist right here in Japan, including one that was started by the Japanese government. Today, you no longer have to ask your parents to arrange your match or ask your friends to set you up. Today, all you have to do is go on an app and give your specifications, and it will give you the perfect match. And so you have dating apps that are dedicated to finding you people that are into gluten lovers only, or cat lovers, or farmers only. You name your specification and they will find you the perfect match. So the question to be asked is, what are the consequences of this choice? We know we live in a world of a lot of choice. We know we live in a world of a lot of information. Now, I didn't know that the world was going to have even more choice. But in 1995, after spending some time in Japan, and I will confess to you that when I was in Japan, I was a little taken aback by the fact that there was so few choice. And I thought, oh, this is really odd. And I went back to the United States, and then I felt it was really odd how much choice I had. It was almost like I had gotten adjusted to the Japanese system, and I went back to the American system, and now suddenly I felt overwhelmed. And I remember at that time, I used to love going to this one grocery store, and it was called Draeger's. And this was a special store because it offered a lot of choice. So they had 250 different types of mustards and vinegars and mayonnaises. They had over 500 different types of fruits and vegetables. They had over 100 different types of extra virgin olive oil. So this was a special store. In fact, I used to go to this store because it was like an amusement park. I would go there, I would sample a few things, and then I would go next door to the grocery store, the other grocery store, to actually buy my groceries. And one day I asked myself, how come I never buy anything? Now, this was such a special store that I can tell you that on a regular basis, there were bus loads of tourists, often Japanese tourists, that would come to the store to just walk around and look around at all these choices. And so I went in to see the manager, and I asked him, does all this work? And he said, look at all the tourists that come here. And so after many discussions, we did a study. Today, this study has become quite famous, but at the time, I was just doing a small study. And so this has come to be called the JAM study. Now, at that time, they had 348 different kinds of jam that they offered on the jam shelf. And so we set up a little tasting booth right near the entrance of the store. where we either put out 6 different flavors of jam or 24 different flavors of jam. And we looked at 2 things. First, in which case were people more likely to stop and try some jam? And second, in which case were people more likely to buy a jar of jam? It turned out that more people stopped when there were 24 on display than when there were 6. But when it came down to buying behavior, now we saw the opposite effect. It turned out that of the people who stopped when there were 24 on display, only 3% of them bought a jar of jam. Whereas of the people who stopped when there were 6 on display, 30% of them bought a jar of jam. So that even though people were excited to see the extra jams, they were attracted by the larger display of jams, when it came down to actually making a choice, they were more likely to make a choice when they saw 6 than when they saw 24. So that was the first documentation of the idea that perhaps there were limits to the human capacity to handle choice. After the jam study came out, and that study was published in the year 2000. Now, I did not know when I did the jam study that we were about to reach a tipping point, and that in fact the world was going to explode with choice and information, and that not only would globalization make this more possible, but so too would technology further facilitate and expedite the process. After doing the jam study, I was approached by the financial company Vanguard to look at a different question. At that time, in the United States, there were employee programs that were becoming popular where you would give employees choices for how to put away part of their salary in retirement savings accounts. It was fast becoming clear that the pension programs were never going to make it. And so you would have to be able to help employees save money for their retirement. And they felt that the way to help people was to give people lots and lots of choices of where to invest their money. So Vanguard handed me a data set with over 1 million people in it, primarily Americans, 650 different companies representing 64 industries. And we looked at whether employees were more likely to save as the number of investment choices increased. So in our data set, employees had anywhere from 2 funds investment choices all the way up to about 60 different choices. And it turned out that as the number of options grew, people's likelihood to save for their retirement dropped. When we next looked at the people who did choose to invest, we asked the question, if you do choose, are you choosing better as the number of options grow? And even there, we were disappointed. As the number of options got larger, more people stayed away from stocks. They were more likely to put their money in money market accounts. They were more likely to put their money in bonds. That does not make sense when you're talking about retirement savings. Particularly for young people, they were supposed to be putting more of their money in equities, which they were avoiding. So that was the second documentation that, in fact, as the number of options increase, people have trouble. Now, since then, there have been hundreds of studies. In fact, we're right now doing a review. And there's almost 1,000 studies that have looked at the effects of offering more choice. And they've looked at this question not just with humans, but also with animals. And they've looked at it across many, many, many choice domains. Just to give you a sense of the variety, let me now tell you a medical study. If you have a disease, and they give you a choice of 2 medicines or 9 medicines, it turns out that when people choose the medicine from 9 choices, they're more likely to report having side effects. So they experience more side effects when they choose from 9 different medical choices as compared to 2. But here's the interesting thing. They were all choosing amongst placebos. So it's psychological. Even animals like crickets, if you give them too many choices for who to mate with, they don't mate. So my advice to the Japanese government is you do want to create a dating app, but you don't want to give people so many choices that they don't want to date. Okay, so why is having more choice complicated? Clearly, we want more choice because the more choices we have, the more opportunity we have to find a really good match, to find something that is exactly what we want. So why does it not always enable us to do that? Well, there's at least 2 reasons. First, we have cognitive limitations. So in 1956, the great psychologist George Miller wrote a seminal paper called The Magical Number 7 plus or minus 2. And in that, he showed us that our minds are limited. If I ask you to rank order from best to worst, ice creams, novels, investments, beyond about 7 plus or minus 2, I do not know what I like and don't like. If I ask you to keep track of information, words, numbers, pictures, beyond about 7 plus or minus 2, that information crumbles away. What is a choice but a bundle of information? What are you doing when you make a choice but comparing bundles upon bundles of information? Now, recent studies conducted by neuroscientists, where they look at our brains under the fMRI machine, have found that it might actually be less than 7 plus or minus 2. It's closer to between 3 to 5 bits of information. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, that's true, but there are times when I really want a lot of choice. And that is true. If you spend the time studying and becoming an expert, whether it's your favorite music, your clothing designers, your favorite food, whatever that you spend the time learning, then you develop the expertise. And then, yes, you can handle more choice. But if you're not developing expertise, it's going to be difficult. Now, there's another problem with choice and the way we give people choice today. Since you are young people, I know that you guys are more talkative than the Japanese people say you are. And so we're going to prove that, in fact, you like to talk. So I'm going to give you a little fun question. Tell me, if I wanted to get my nails done right now, remember I'm blind, so I need your help. Which one of these 2 nail polishes do you think I should have the beautician do on my nails. If you think it's the one on the left that would look good on me, can you clap your hands? Thank you. What about the one on the right? Okay, that seemed a little more energetic. Okay, now what's the difference between these two colors? Please explain. Tell me, what does the one on the left look like? Okay, and what about the one on the right? Oh, okay. Very nice. Okay. So, here I am in a beauty salon, and I have to choose between these two colors. And they tell me that the one is called ballet slippers. And I say, oh, that sounds nice. What does it look like? It's a sheer pink. It'll look elegant on you. And then the other lady says, no, go for the other one. I said, okay, what is it called? Adorable. What does it look like? It's a light pink. It'll look glamorous on you. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, sheer pink, light pink. I can't figure out how they're different. And about the only thing they could agree on was that if I could see it, I would know the difference. Okay? Well, I wondered about this. I mean, I know sighted people think they can see a lot, but really? So I took the labels off, and I brought them into the laboratory, and I invited a bunch of women. And I asked them, which one would you choose? Well, first of all, 50% of them thought I was playing a trick, and that it was the same color in two different bottles. Now, you didn't think that, right? Of the other 50%, more people picked Adorable. Now, then I put the labels back on, and I invited more women, new women, and I asked them, which one would you pick? Now, more people picked ballet slippers, which tells me that a name, that a rose by a different name actually would smell different, because they couldn't actually tell them apart, and so they went by the name. So here's the problem today. You have so many choices, but they're often not very different from one another, are they? But you don't want to say eeny, meeny, miny, moe, because that makes you feel like a loser. No one's going to just do eeny, meeny, miny, moe. No, I'm supposed to know the difference. I'm supposed to know which one I like more versus less. As the number of options grow, often we increase them by making such little differences between the choices that it's not clear how much it adds value. So that's what's happening in the marketplace. What that means for us as choosers is that we now have to ask ourselves, does it matter? Do these differences matter? Should I be wasting my mental energy trying to figure out the difference between these two colors if it may not make a difference? So I would say those are two very big causes of choice overload, which is that we really have limitations, and on top of that, they're constantly giving us a lot of choices, but they're not meaningfully different. So what I'm now going to do is describe to you three different methods. Thank you. I'm now going to describe to you three different techniques that you can be using in your life to help you navigate choice. Because let's face it, choice is not going to be dropping. It's not going to be going away. Nor do I want you to make it go away. But I do want you to not become paralyzed by choice. I want choice to be something you are empowered by. And in order to do that, you have to be more thoughtful and more strategic about choosing. So I'm going to show you now 3 different things that you can be doing on a regular basis to help you choose better. The first is you do want to ask yourself, how many choices do I really need? Right? Don't waste your time getting more and more choice if it's not something that matters to you. Now, for businesses too, it is helpful when they start to drop choice and actually offer less. For example, when Procter & Gamble reduced the number of shampoos and conditioners, they actually saw an increase in sales. Aldi is one of the largest retailers in the world, and it's a grocery store, and it only offers about 1,600 options. Costco also, as they dropped the number of options in their stores, saw an increase in sales. So if you're thoughtful about getting rid of those extra products that are really not that different from the other ones, it can help. We know that roughly 80% of sales across almost every kind of retail is accounted for by about 20% of the options that they have on offer. So that means about 80% of the options that they offer are not being taken advantage of. I'm not saying that you offer little choice, but what I am saying is you want to look at the choices that you're offering and ask yourself, which of these choices are actually different from each other so that you're making it easier for people to know what they like and what they don't like. For you in your own personal life, you want to ask yourself, of all those 7,000 choices that you're making, which ones are worth making? And which ones are not worth making? The ones that are worth making, you want to put in the effort, because good quality choices comes from thoughtfulness. The ones that you've decided are not so important, then just go with what the experts say, or whatever seems to be good enough. The second technique is categorization. So, why is it that as an expert, you can handle more choices? That's because when you have expertise, it's not that you have the ability to process more information. It's that you have learned how to categorize the information. So, for example, if you are a chess master, if you contemplate your next chess move, you are thinking about the number of options you have are more than the number of stars in the galaxy. Because you have to think about, if I do this, my opponent will do this. And then or my opponent could do this, or my opponent could do this. In which case I do this, or I do this. So as a chess player, you're thinking about at least 9 moves ahead of where you're at. You have to play out all these possibilities. So they're contemplating so many choices, more choices than the number of stars in the galaxy. And yet, they're able to make a choice in a reasonable amount of time. And the reason is because in that moment when they're looking at a chessboard, they can immediately throw out all the irrelevant options and zero in on that handful of most relevant options. So it's not that they're able to examine more options, it's that they're able to identify what's that meaningful set of options to pay attention to. If I take a chessboard and organize it in a way that could not happen in a chess game, and now I show that chessboard to a chess master versus a novice, the chess master will do no differently at rearranging that chessboard than the novice, because they haven't been trained at it. So, categorization is a technique that we can use to help people choose more like experts, or at least get some of the benefits. So, for example, I did a study with magazine aisles. It turns out in a magazine aisle you can have lots and lots of magazines there. You know, in the same aisle you could either double or triple or quadruple stock the same magazine, or you could do lots of different magazines. And so in the same structure, physical structure, you could have anywhere from 300 different magazines or 650 magazines. Now it turns out that if I categorize, let's say if I take 600 magazines, well, actually, maybe I'll turn this into a question for you guys. Okay. So I'm going to give you a quiz, okay? In which case do you think people are better off as choosers? If I give them 400 magazines and I divide it up into 5 categories, or if I take 400 magazines and I divide it up into 20 categories. If you think the first, clap your hands. Okay, and if you think the second, clap your hands. Okay, so the room is split. Okay, it turns out you're better off dividing it up into more categories. Okay, so our brain cannot handle that many choices, but we can handle more categories. So if I ask you for categories, let's say women's fashion, golf, I don't know, cars, right? All I have to ask myself is yes or no. Do I care about this category? And so I just say no, 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 no. Ooh, I'm very interested in the restaurants of Tokyo. Okay, let me look at the magazines in this category. So as long as you make the number of options in a particular category few, roughly a handful, you can actually give people more category, because our brains can handle more category, because all I have to do is rule them out. All right, so we can handle more categories, but you still have to be careful about how you think about these categories. So take a look at these two jewelry collections. Okay, one is called jazz, and the other one is called swing. Okay? So, if you think the jazz collection is the one on the left, clap your hands. Okay, and if you think the jazz collection is the one on the right, clap your hands. Okay, you got this right, guys. That's great. Okay, yes, indeed, the jazz collection is the one on the right. But what's wrong with these category names? Someone want to answer that question? What's wrong? The terrible category names.
The name does not really represent the appearances.
Very good. The name tells me nothing that's of value. So just like those nail polish names tells me nothing about the color of the nail polish, these names are very cute, but not helpful. You want to make sure that the category names are actually helping me do the job of saying yes or no. Do I care about this or not? If you're going to trick people, then you're not making it any easier. You're just making it worse. Okay. And by the way, the same thing goes when you are going to the store. Before you just start saying, oh, this looks good, and this looks good, and this looks good. No. If you care about what you're about to go and choose, organize it. Take the time to figure out what are the categories. Ask yourself which category you care about. If you don't care, then just ask the expert what's good and be done with it. Okay? So don't waste your time if it's not important. On a daily basis, when I wake up in the morning, I always say, okay, what are the 3 to 5 things I want to care about today? That's it. And I still get tired by the end of the day. So just imagine if you're asking yourself to pay attention to more than that. All right, the last technique is the one that I've been most working on in the last almost 10 years now. And so some of you might have seen the new book I've come out called Think Bigger. So in Think Bigger, what I've done is I've created a 6-step method that is designed to help you take advantage of choice and create meaningful choices. Because I think that's the main objective for all of us, no matter who we are, is to figure out how to take advantage of choice and create meaningful choices. Because right now, we live in a world where for all the really big choices, the really important problems, what do people do? They just throw up their hands and say, "Shagata ganai," or "it's not possible," or "let's do something that makes no sense." They don't see choice. On the other hand, when you walk into an ice cream parlor, you have 100 choices or more. We need to be able to help people do a better job of picking, because Lord knows we right now have so many choices, many of which are not even real choices. They might be fake. We have a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of distraction. So we need to help people do a better job of picking. And then, just as importantly, we actually need to help people make meaningful choices, not meaningless choices. And so, in Think Bigger, I outline a 6-step process. And in that process, I teach people how to do exactly what I just said. And so I've been teaching this to MBA students and engineering students for the last 10 years. And the book describes the method. I'm going to show you briefly the most important tool of the book. And of the method. This book is, by the way, available in Japanese. It just came out a few months ago. And they actually just interviewed me earlier today on the Tokyo TV channel. So here's the most important tool. It's called the choice map. So at the top of the choice map, you say, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Okay, and your problem could be, like, how do I figure out how to manage my time while in college? Or, how do I figure out my career after college? You can use this for any kind of problem. Then you say, okay, well, why do I have trouble with time management? Well, how do I get all my homework done? How do I make sure I have enough time to hang out with my friends? How do I make sure that I'm also meeting new people, learning about things that are not covered in class, right? So you break down your problem into the various subparts or the various challenges that you want to confront when managing your time. When you're able to break it down, then you start for each part of your breakdown. Well, first of all, after you break it down, you might discover that there actually is already a choice available. You just couldn't see it before it now. So that's the first thing it does, is it helps you see, is there already a choice available in the marketplace that you didn't realize? Let's imagine that there isn't already an amazing choice out there. And so now you want to create your own choice. So now we further expand the choice map. So when you expand the choice map, what you do is at the top, you say, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Then you break it down. And then for each part of your problem, you say, okay, what do normal people do to solve this problem? Okay, so here's what people normally do. So, how do I manage all my homework and everything else? I just don't sleep very much, so I'm tired. Okay, so be sleepy. Okay, then in the rest of the row, you say, okay, well, what do non-students do when they have to manage their time and not make mistakes? What do other people do that, say, the military, when they have a lot to accomplish, how do they manage it? Say, different religious figures that may have to stay awake for a long time and get a lot done. So you see, what you do is you ask yourself, who else would have had to solve this problem successfully, and what did they do? Now, you can apply this for any kind of a problem. So I've been teaching this, and the students use this to come up with ideas for entrepreneurial ventures, for not-for-profits, all kinds of things. When the world shut down, one of the people that had been trained on Think Bigger invited me to serve as an advisor to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, during the pandemic, had to solve some pretty important problems, like the ventilator crisis, like the vaccine crisis. How do you get vaccines to all different parts of the world? And so what we did was we created wisdom councils, where what we would do is we would bring groups of people into Zoom from different backgrounds to solve the problem. So for example, recall at the beginning of the pandemic, we did not have enough ventilators. And so the question we asked was, who else has to think about breathing? And maybe they can help provide a new solution. And so we did one project with a snorkeling mask company, and they teamed up with a 3D printing company who made a 3D printed valve so you can breathe. And so they made a temporary mask that was used in hospitals in Europe. Another thing we did was he said, well, who else thinks about breathing? Well, people that work in space. And so a small team of employees at NASA created a briefcase-sized ventilator in 37 days. and that is actually still being used in some parts of Africa. Then, when the vaccine had to be given to people in all parts of the world, including rural parts of Africa, there was a big question of how do you get the vaccine to all these remote parts of Africa and keep it cold? And so the question was, well, who else has this problem of having to transport something small and keep it cold? Coca-Cola. And so we teamed up with Coca-Cola to get vaccines to different parts of the world. Okay, so that is the method. And if you read the book, it will show you how to apply the method. We are right now building an app that would sit on top of ChatGPT. So think of the Choice GPT. And this will actually help you walk through the method, and it will pull material from OpenAI to help you do it, to help you create choices. So I thought just for fun, this is a very alpha product right now, but I'm going to show you some screenshots. Now, this can be done in English and in Japanese. And so, for example, we picked the problem, how do you create affordable housing in Japan? There, you've got it up, right? You're going to put the Japanese version? Okay, we're going to put the Japanese version. So let me know when you have it. It's up. Okay, so this is the problem. And now it will give you the breakdown. So notice that it gives you the breakdown. Now, this does not hallucinate. It will give you the link so that you can go see the research behind how it came up with this breakdown. You can edit it, of course. Then it asks you, well, who cares about this problem? Like, why do you care? Who are you? Okay, well, you know, I'm the, who do we put in for the Japanese government, or a real estate developer? Okay, so let's say we put real estate developer wants to make affordable housing. Who's their target? Japanese people. Who are the external parties? Well, you probably have to care about government regulators, etc. So these are all the stakeholders that matter. So just think of this as you're walking through all the steps of making a decision. So now when you plug this in, it now tells you, okay, what would each of these people care about? And the reason why this matters is because this will become your criteria for choosing later on. So now you've put the wants up?
I only have a choice map.
Oh, okay, so sorry, okay, great. So then, after we put up the wants, now it will give you a completed choice map. Okay, so you see the first column here is all the options in domain, meaning what could the Japanese government or what options do you already have in Japan to help solve the problem? But if you want to look outside to get other ideas that you could use to solve the problem, look at what it generates across the row. It shows you what's happening in all different parts of the world. And so you can look at that for inspiration to create other ideas. That's the power of the choice map. Okay, so with that, I want to conclude by saying that you are living in a moment of time which is both exciting and scary. And I think it's going to be up to you to solve the problem of how to help yourselves and the next generation essentially get ahead of choice, create meaningful choices. And my most fervent wish is that all of you learn how to think bigger, because we need you to. It's up to you now to help create choices that can make the world a better place. So thank you very much. Yeah, well, they need to be meaningfully different, though. The problem right now is when you look around the globe, when you have a lot of choices, they're often so indistinguishable. Then they start fighting with each other. You can't tell who actually stands for what. So yes, you want to cut it. You want to cut it so that you don't want the American system where you have two choices and they're just like awful. What you want are meaningfully different choices, somewhere between, not more than 5. It is usually better to have more than 2, like somewhere between 3 to 5, but they can't be so similar.
I see.
They actually have to be viably different ideas.
Thank you.
Right, so we're going to see, based on your advice, we're going to see what our students would choose in the election. Yeah.
So when you make a choice, you should use analysis to generate the information. So notice the choice map is very deliberative about how you collect the information. What's the problem? What are the causes for the problem? What are the different pieces that I have, strategies that I have that I can use for solving the problem? That's where you collect the data. That is the material that you will use to create your options. Now, if you do a good job of collecting good materials to create options, you can create many options. Amongst those options, the way you finally select your choosing criteria, that, yes, boils down to your preferences. So what we can do with logic and data collection is try to load the dice in your favor so that the options you're choosing amongst are all decent. But in the end, which one you choose from that decent set of options will boil down to your preference. I mean, look, the average startup has, a very high chance of failing, right? I mean, if you succeed at a business, you're actually in the minority. That's why people are scared of starting startups. I would start with one. I would start with one. I really would. And know that it's a risky move, but that's okay. You guys are young, right? You can afford to start working at a startup. You can afford to start a startup. You will learn a lot. And, but don't start with too many, right? Start with one, use it as an opportunity to learn.
And perhaps you can diversify later.
Yes.
ありがとうございます。貴重な機会をいただいて本当にありがとうございます。
Thank you for the great opportunity to have your advice.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I'm not so sure, by the way, I think Elon Musk will go down in history as somebody who, liked to create disruptions. But I'm not so sure how many of his businesses are going to be sustainable, right? So there's a real chance that this X thing will die. There's a real chance that BYD or Toyota are going to kill Tesla. It'll be the first mover, but it's not clear that the first mover is actually going to win. So it'll go down in history as a first mover, but not obvious to me that it's going to be the ultimate winner in the electrical vehicle industry, right? Space, he actually may have a stronger advantage. You know, and then the other businesses, I don't think we know enough yet.
Would that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you very much.
So I think even animals suffer when their choices are taken away, right? On average, animals don't do as well in zoos as they would in the wild, right? Unless it's an endangered species. You know, no animal or human would ever choose to be caged, right? So we know that there is a natural instinct for all living things to want to be, at the most basic level, free. Otherwise, why would every single country in the world created a prison for punishment? Now, so we have to understand that even if somebody has a mental disability, they're going to want freedom. Now the question becomes, how much freedom can you give them? How do you organize that freedom? And how do you, because a lot of times when people want freedom, it boils down to very simple choices. Would you like to eat this or this? Would you like to watch this movie or take a walk or do whatever? So we have to understand that we're not all born, while we are all born wanting a basic choice, we're not all born wanting tons of choice, right? We just want to have that experience as we go through the day of having some choices. So, I mean, that's the basic principle. It would be hard for me to say specifically what to do with that mental disorder unless I knew what it was. Yeah. But that's the principle.
Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. So the reason why I showed you the idea of defining the problem and breaking it down is I do think a lot of times people lose track of what is their criteria. And I do think that when you go into a choosing situation, you need to ask yourself, wait, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What are the most important criteria that I need to have fulfilled? Because if you don't think about that, you're not going to choose well, because there's a lot of noise out there. They're not giving you equally legitimate options, and they're not explaining them to you in a ethical way. They're going to give you a lot of noise. So if you're not walking in there knowing this is the problem I'm trying to solve, this is the criteria that matters to me, you're not going to choose well.
I see. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, can it be a threat?
Yeah, it can be a threat.
Absolutely. Misinformation. So let's, there's all this hype about AI. Let's just pare down what AI is and stop talking about it as if it's this almost like godlike entity. What is AI? Right? AI is simply, it takes like all the information that you plug in and make available now. Like in the old days, it was all the information available on the streets when you looked at the stores, et cetera. Now it's just think of it as a big marketplace of information on the internet, right?
Yeah.
And all it does is it takes all this information and it says, oh, okay, you guys chose this, 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 this. You bought all these things, or you consumed all this information on TikTok or Facebook or social media or whatever you consumed, right? And it says, well, based on all these past choices, I'm going to use statistics to predict that you are going to now choose this thing.
Yes.
Okay? That's what it's doing, right?
Yeah.
So it's, first of all, it's collecting, it's taking, you've got all this collection of information. And now it's using past information to predict the future. Okay? Now, can it manipulate you? Yeah, it's pigeonholing you, first of all. It's saying you can only choose in accordance with how you've chosen in the past. Maybe you want to do something different. Maybe you want to watch a different TV show. Maybe you want to learn about, I don't know, different kinds of news. Maybe you don't always want to hear about the same things over and over again. It's kind of taking that choice away, right? The second thing it can do is once you have misinformation, like dishonest information, deep fakes, etc., that's in there, it's not yet capable of truly differentiating between misinformation and good information.
Yes.
And what it will do is simply treat all bits of information as equal, which they're not.
Okay. So you mean like maybe AI helps you to make a choice as a whole?
When you say it's making a choice, I mean, it can certainly, like, if it knows, if it looks at your content that you put out on Facebook, it can use that to decide what personality type you are. And then based on that, it can start pushing certain products on you because it knows that for that personality type, they typically like these products, they typically like these political candidates. So sure, in that sense, it's manipulating or at least trying to strongly influence your choices, sure.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that trying to do everything, spending hours upon hours on the phone, collecting all kinds of random bits of information is necessarily going to put you in a good place. I also don't think the extreme of doing very little puts you in a good place. So the way I think of it, so we often think of Einstein as a genius. And Einstein certainly did genius things. What I think is really useful about Einstein is to watch his process. And so, first off, when he died, they thought he was such a genius that they took his brain and they preserved it. They actually stole it. They preserved it. You can go see it in some museum in Philadelphia. They tried to compare it to normal people's brains, and they've yet to find a difference. But I'll tell you something that's often overlooked about Einstein. He spent 7 years as a patent officer. Now, what does a patent officer do? A patent officer learns about different things, but it learns about these different things in enormous depth. So he's learning about the typewriter, he's learning about refrigeration, he's learning about cameras. And he's learning in depth about this stuff, which he can't just superficially process, right? He's actually having to read it, understand it, to award the patent. So later on, when he comes up with his theory of relativity, he's actually taking these different information bits that he'd already gained from all these patents, and he's simply combining it in a new way. In his words, he described his time as a patent officer as his worldly cloister in which he hatched his most beautiful ideas. So why do I say this? It's very important for all of you to learn about something of interest, your core expertise. But don't just stick to that thing. You have to learn about other things as well. Don't learn a little and a little and a little and a little and a little such that you can't take advantage of any of that extra stuff. Learn your core, but then always expose yourself to other bits of knowledge because that's how you get creative. But when you expose yourself to other bits of knowledge, it still has to be in a way that you learn something useful from it that you can apply.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I guess the time is up, unfortunately. Thank you so much for your answers, for your advice. I guess there was quite a lot to learn tonight. Thank you again.
Thank
A big
you,
hand
everybody.
for Professor Iyengar.